Hello there, this is Steady Rollin' Bob Margolin. I'm here today to honor Muddy Waters. I played in his band from 1973 to 1980. I feel him every time I touch a guitar, and I would really like to thank his family for honoring him so well these days. He's got his own official Facebook page, which a lot of people that passed away in 1983 don't have. I would like to tell you a little bit about him and maybe play some of his music for you. First of all, let me put on my stage clothes. I don't know if I look better this way, but you do. I had a second job when I was playing guitar in Muddy's band. I was the bouncer at his interviews. People would sometimes ask him questions that were the same ones over and over again, or even weirder questions than that, and he would give me a subtle hint. I would be standing in the back of the room behind the interviewer. Muddy would give me a subtle hint like this. And then I would say, oh, Muddy has to rest now for his show tonight. Interview will have to be over. And Muddy would go, I'm sorry, he's the bad guy. And I guess I've been the bad guy ever since. But one time, one of those interviewers asked a question that was so smart and so interesting that I leaned in because I wanted to hear the answer from Muddy too. He said, Muddy, of all the songs that you wrote, what is your favorite? Here's the answer. I used to have such a sweet little mama. Boys, I used to have such a happy home. Screaming and crying, thinking about the times have been. I used to have 7 wives, but now all I got is Facebook friends. Well, that's not exactly what he sang. wondering where have my people gone. I feel my poor self sinking down. I believe I can't last very long. Thank you so much for Muddy Waters and for you. By the way, you may notice this guitar says Pinetop on the peg head. Pinetop Perkins gave me this guitar in 1997, and I named it after Pinetop. I'll leave it right here, right now, and I understand folks have been coming up with some questions. My teleprompter doesn't work today, but I can read some of these questions. What was your favorite Muddy Waters album? Well, I asked Muddy that very same question one time, and he said it was The Best of Muddy Waters, which coincidentally has been reissued by Muddy's estate on vinyl. A wonderful way to hear it, and you might want to check that out if you can. It has some of his classic songs. Now, after I had asked that question, we went to Woodstock, New York, and recorded the Muddy Waters Woodstock album with Levon Helm and Paul Butterfield and Garth Hudson and Pinetop. After that, in 1976, we went to Connecticut and we recorded an album called Hard Again with Johnny Winter playing and producing on it, James Cotton on the harmonica, Johnny Winter on the guitar, of course. I played guitar. Cotton's bass player, Charles Camise, played bass, and Willie Big Eye Smith played the drums, and Pinetop Perkins was on the piano. And it was a powerful album. We did 2 more albums after that. Muddy Mississippi Waters Live. I think right before that one was an album called I'm Ready. And finally, there was one more that came out in about 1981 called King Bee. And those were the 4 that were available now on Sony Legacy. And Johnny Winter produced those. But I think if somebody were able to ask Muddy the question, what is your favorite Muddy Waters album today, he'd still go back and he would say, The Best of Muddy Waters. It really is. Another question. What was your favorite memory of Muddy, both on and off stage? Well, on stage, he kept up a fairly consistent level of performance, so it's hard to pick a favorite from the hundreds of times I did shows with him. But there was one night in, I'd say, the mid-70s when we were playing in Europe where he just seemed to get the spirit. He did the song 2 Trains Running, and at the end of it, he broke into, a double time singing, she's all right, she's all right, she's all right, she's all right, for about 10 minutes until he finally cut his hand down and the band ended and we all fell down back into our own little worlds again to go on as best we could. That was my favorite onstage moment with Muddy. Who are some of your blues inspirations? Well, I got a good hint from Muddy about asking him that same question. He would say, I come from Son House and Robert Johnson. So I went back and I listened to them too and was suitably inspired. However, the Chicago blues musicians that played in that golden age of Chicago blues in the late 40s, early to mid 50s, that Muddy Waters was kind of in the forefront of that. But I also love Howlin' Wolf and Willie Dixon, Hubert Sumlin, who played guitar with Howlin' Wolf, Jimmy Rogers, who played guitar with Muddy Waters, Little Walter, of course, the all-time great harmonica player. I just think he's fantastic. These people inspire me, as well as more modern musicians like B.B. King and T-Bone Walker, who was out there. I believe he was older than Muddy was. For blues people, those are the ones that really drive me crazy. For more modern groups, there was, of course, the group, the band, which they brought us to the Last Waltz, and we played with them on the concert and in the movie in 1976. I just think they're spectacular musicians. Eric Clapton brought us on tour in 1978 and 1979. The Allman Brothers brought us on tour in 1975. I learned a lot from listening to all these musicians, whether I used it on Muddy's bandstand or not. Let's take another question from this piece of paper. What do you think of the future of the blues? Are there any current blues artists that impress you? Oh, yeah. There's lots of great musicians playing blues out there, all the way from very progressive and contemporary back to traditional, that I love. But the most exciting ones for me are the young musicians that I meet by being the musical director of the Pinetop Perkins Foundation Masterclass workshops. Every summer we have 4 or 5 days in Clarksdale, Mississippi, which was where Muddy grew up, and certainly one of the homes of the blues in the world. You can feel the ghosts in the air there. These young folks, or young at heart folks, come down there, and we try to show them as much about blues as we can. But when you're doing a workshop, the not so hidden secret is that the people that are doing the teaching get even more out of it than the students. It is so exciting to watch the blue light go on over the head of a young person when they hear, well, some of the older traditional music and find their own ways with their own talent and creativity. I think the blues is going to be around for a long time. That a lot of people worry about it, but that got settled a long time ago. Another reason that the blues is going to be around for a long time is the efforts of the Blues Foundation in Memphis, which brings people together from all over the world and promotes these deep blues that we love, as well as music that is descended from that deep blues too. Let's see what we got here now. Who was the best harp player you and Muddy played with? That's a good question. When I got in the band, the harmonica player was George Mojo Dreamy-Eyed Good-Looking Buford, as Muddy used to introduce him. He was an excellent harp player, and you can find on YouTube a version of Muddy playing Got My Mojo Working on the Midnight Special TV show in 1973. And you'll see that George is a stronger player than most people would give him credit for. He played Mojo really, really well. He was Mojo. And the thing that I noticed that's a little chilling is that in that wonderful video, I'm the only one that's still alive. There you go. what am I gonna do? I made a crossroads moment recently when I realized that I stayed on the earth longer than Muddy Waters did. I'm 68 years old now, too. Let's see what we've got here now. Oh, well, that was just one of the harmonica players that we worked with when I first joined the band. Right after that, Jerry Portnoy got into the band, and he is a fantastic player, just wonderful at shaping notes and playing very creative solos. He's still around. He and I and Luther Guitar Junior Johnson just played together recently at the Niagara Falls Blues Festival. It was a wonderful experience. Of course, at the same time, we recorded that Woodstock album with Paul Butterfield on the harmonica player, one of my real blues heroes. On the Hard Again album, we had James Cotton playing harp on it. On the album called I'm Ready, they had Big Walter Horton, and Jerry Portnoy was there as well. Carrie Bell played with us now and then, a great Chicago blues harp player, the father of Lurie Bell, who is becoming a real blues star these days. He's not a young man anymore either, but he carries on the blues of his father, Carrie Bell. There were really some wonderful ones. Anytime we got a chance to play with Paul Osher, who had played in Muddy's band in the late 60s and early 70s, it was a real thrill. He's still out there living in Austin, Texas, and he is fantastic. He is a deep blues man. He learned harp before he was in Muddy's band, but while he was there, he learned guitar from Muddy, and he learned piano from Otis Spann. Just an amazingly talented deep blues musician. Every sound he makes is deep blues. Can't say enough good about Paul Osher. Just one of our great ones. We did have Big Walter Horton on that I'm Ready album, and it was a thrill to play with him, of course. He's known for having a gigantic tone. But by the time I got on the scene, little Walter, who was like the Jimi Hendrix of the blues harmonica player, he changed everything for everybody. He was already gone by the time I got there. Let's see. As far as people that jammed with us during that time, that was a fantastic opportunity. We got to, there were a lot of very famous rock musicians that loved and respected Muddy. People like Bob Dylan, like the Rolling Stones, like Eric Clapton, Greg Allman. They all sat in with us at one time or another, and they were all fantastic. But we were just as happy to play with our friends, the Nighthawks from Washington, D.C., and I still get together with them, and we celebrate Muddy's music together as well as rock and roll a little bit too. Let's take another question from the piece of paper. Oh, let's see. If I could build an all-star blues band, who would you have playing each instrument? Well, that happened very often in those albums I was describing. So let me just say people like Johnny Winter and James Cotton, and of course every once in a while we'd get to be around Willie Dixon. He and Muddy were very close friends, and Willie wrote a lot of Muddy's hit songs and was just a fantastic musician. Eric Clapton was very, very nice to us too out there. Well, what am I up to musically these days? I've never stopped wanting to honor Muddy, but at the same time, one of the things that I should take from example that Muddy inspires was to make my own music, to tell my own story while still carrying on the old school Chicago blues that Muddy loved. Whether I do a song that's rock and roll or funky or a more modern style of blues, there will be a sensibility and a foundation that came from the style of Muddy Waters in there. There's a lot of people who come to see me just because they want to get just a little taste of that, and Muddy's not around to perform live anymore. Well, Muddy took it with him. I can't reproduce Muddy for you. I can interpret his songs, and I feel them when we play. I hope you do too. What is the most valuable lesson Muddy Waters taught you? Well, I would say it is the language of playing Chicago blues. How to take direction while you're in a band, and also how to lead one when it was my turn to do that. There are certain cues, certain licks, and certain ways of playing, a certain feel that Muddy Waters called delay time. It was so far behind the beat that it made you just beg for the next note. Those things were very important to learn on stage. Off stage, I'll tell you a couple of stories when he, well, there was one time when he gave me a financial lesson. He explained to the band that sometimes he took shows that he didn't profit on himself, but they kept us on the road in between other shows when we were touring, and he didn't make any money, and he said, sometimes I'm playing for y'all. Well, he didn't resent it. He figured it was his responsibility as a band leader to try and make a living for his band as well as do well for himself. And the thing that he said, I love this expression, you can't make all the money all the time. I wish somebody would tell that to some people today. With good advice from Muddy Waters. Let's look and see what we have here. Let's see. I'm not finding any that I can answer easily. Oh, here's one. I wrote a story about Muddy Waters with everything I could think about him in 1994, 11 years after he passed, for Blues Review magazine, which isn't there anymore. There's a magazine that's somewhat descended for it called Blues Music Magazine that I still write for. But I wrote this double-wide story about Muddy for, I think, issue number 20 of Blues Review in 1994. And one of the stories that I told in there is that Muddy had really sharp ears. He could tell with a seven-piece band going on, if one of the guitar players had one of their strings was flat, he'd turn around and say, your D string is sharp. I thought that was a pretty amazing thing to be able to do. And if somebody made a mistake on stage, he would look around at them and maybe sometimes put his finger in his ear so he didn't have to hear that side of the stage. He was not always pleasant and cheerful on the stage. If he wasn't enjoying himself, I could see it. I hope the audience just thought he was being deep and soulful, but sometimes he wasn't having as much fun as we would hope to have on the bandstand. If so, he probably hit it very well by the depth of his music. It was in there somewhere. He used it and put his feelings into the way that he presented himself. On the other hand, he had a very active sense of humor and was ready to laugh and have fun on stage too. And the YouTube videos that you can see of that, so it's a lot of fun, and it makes me smile to see him smile. Now, sometimes Muddy wasn't perfect. He'd make a mistake on the guitar while he was trying to play something, and when he did, he would look down at his own guitar as though it had betrayed him. "How could you do this to me?" And then he would just shake his head and go on. I never saw anybody do that before, but that's the way Muddy used to deal with the situation, as if he hit a wrong note on the guitar on stage. It didn't happen often. It's easy to remember the few times that it did happen. I think I already did describe my all-time favorite performance by Muddy. It was that time we were playing in Nîmes, France, which is where they made the kind of champagne that he liked, which was Piper Heidsieck. And God knows it probably cost 10 times as much as it did in the 1970s, but he had a bottle of it in the rider of his contract for every night that he played, and it made him feel good. He had said, "It doesn't drive my blood pressure up as much as my doctor said whiskey will," so he switched from whiskey to champagne. That made him happy and loosened him up, and he enjoyed that drink for the rest of his life. Let's see what else we have here. What do you miss most about Muddy? Well, you know what? I don't hardly miss him at all, because he's so present in my life. Every time I play some music, whether it's my original songs or going back and trying to honor him by playing his songs, I can feel him near me. With these magic Ray-Bans, I can almost see him on stage. With YouTube, I can see him on stage. He's a very important presence in my life, and I am always wanting to honor him. And again, let me thank his family for taking that over so strongly lately and carrying on his legacy. He has 3 sons that sing right now. One of them is Joseph Morganfield, who is the spokesperson for his estate, and Joseph just started singing, but I haven't heard it yet. I'll bet it's good, because his brothers, Big Bill Morganfield and Mud Morganfield, sure do deliver some of that Muddy Waters sound when they play, or especially when they sing Muddy's music, and even in their own music. Muddy always wished that young African Americans would pick up on what he called old school Chicago blues. He would be thrilled to know that his sons are doing exactly that very strongly in today's blues world. Do I have any advice to aspiring musicians? Yes. It's the same that I've always had. Don't stay home. Go out, get in blues jams. There's a lot of local ones, especially ones put on by blues societies or blues clubs. Get to play with other blues musicians, older or younger. Explore, develop your talent. I think more will happen on stage. I was once asked to make an instructional video on Muddy Waters' guitar style by the Hal Leonard Company, and with co-author Dave Rubin, we did that in 1998. Recently, in 2015, we made another book called Chicago Blues Rhythm Guitar that was, apparently there'd been a lot of requests for it, and we made that, we made that book that came out in 2015, me and Dave Rubin, and I'm very proud of it. It's done very well, and a lot of people find it useful. Right now, I'm working with Dave on a Chicago blues slide guitar book, and there's naturally going to be a lot about how I play slide guitar, as well as a trip back to visit Muddy Waters again. He was ultimately one of the most inspiring Chicago blues musicians, or American music, or just one of the greatest musicians that ever lived. He had charisma. You could feel it both in his music and from his own person when he was around and that giant was still walking on the earth. I'd like to thank you for listening to me. I'm Steady Rollin' Bob Margolin, and it is an honor to take you back to visit Muddy Waters once again with me. Now, I'm going to show you this guitar that Pinetop Perkins gave to me in 1997. You see that he signed the peg head, and I named the guitar Pinetop. I miss you, old friend. Thank you very much.